The rain poured down in sheets that night, drumming against the glass windows of the silver Rolls-Royce. Inside, a man worth millions sat trembling, clutching his chest as his driver panicked. But it wasn't the driver who saved him. It was her. A thin, barefoot 12-year-old girl who lived in the shadows of the city, drenched to the bone, kneeling in the mud beside his car. Her tiny hands pressed against his chest as she screamed for help, her eyes wild with determination. And when the ambulance finally arrived, the millionaire grabbed her wrist, pulled her close, and whispered words so sharp, so cruel, that they pierced deeper than any storm ever could. What did he say? And why would a man she just saved bring her to tears? Stay with me, because this story will not end the way you think. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Here we share powerful stories every week, stories that remind us that even the softest voices can shake the loudest rooms, because the very people we overlook are often the ones destined to change the ending. Her name was Leah, just 12 years old. She lived with her grandmother in a tiny, crumbling apartment above a noisy laundromat. Her father was gone. Her mother, nobody spoke about. Most days, Leah scavenged through markets and alleyways, collecting empty bottles and scraps to help her grandmother pay rent. To the world, she was invisible, just another poor child of the city. But what nobody knew was that Leah's invisibility was about to shatter. And then there was Charles Whitmore, a man in his late 50s, owner of a vast real estate empire, living in penthouses while other families slept in the cold. To his peers, he was ruthless. To his employees, untouchable. And to the poor, he was the reason rent was rising while hope was falling. He had everything: cars, money, power. But he lacked one thing: humility. And fate has a way of humbling the proud. It happened on a stormy Tuesday evening. Charles was being driven back from an investors' dinner, boasting loudly about the millions he had secured. But then his laughter stopped. His hand shot to his chest, his face twisted in agony. Charles, gasping, "Stop! The car! I can't breathe." The driver panicked, pulling to the side of the road. But in that moment, under the thunder and rain, no one came to help. No one, except Leah. Leah had been sheltering under a bridge, clutching a small sack of bottles she hoped to sell. When she saw the sleek car skid to a halt, she didn't hesitate. She ran barefoot through the rain, ripped the door open, and saw the man crumpled inside. Leah crying out, "Call an ambulance! He's having a heart attack!" The driver fumbled with his phone, hands shaking, but Leah didn't wait. She had learned basic CPR at school months earlier. Kneeling in the mud, she pressed her tiny hands against his chest, counting under her breath, fighting the storm, fighting fear. For 12 endless minutes, she kept him alive, until the sirens finally cut through the night. As the paramedics lifted him into the ambulance, Charles stirred. His eyes opened weakly, locking on Leah. He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. And then he whispered, Charles, hoarse, cruel, "You filthy street rat. Don't think saving me will change anything. Stay away from me and my world." Leah's face crumpled. Tears mixed with the rain as she stumbled back, the paramedics rushing him away. Imagine it. A child risking everything to save a man's life, only to be rewarded with words meant to crush her spirit. But here's where the irony begins, because those cruel words, they would come back to haunt him. News of the rescue spread quickly. Reporters swarmed the hospital. "Millionaire saved by a child hero," the headlines blared. But Charles, he denied it. Claimed his driver had kept him alive until help arrived. Leah's name was never mentioned, not once. She went back to her grandmother's apartment, her body sore from the night, her heart heavier than ever. She had done the impossible, but remained invisible. Or so it seemed. Weeks later, Charles hosted a massive gala, his way of showing the world he was stronger than ever. The city's elite gathered in gowns and tuxedos, glasses clinking under chandeliers. But as he stood on stage, boasting once again of his wealth, a reporter shouted a question. Reporter: "Mr. Whitmore, eyewitnesses say a girl saved your life that night. Why haven't you acknowledged her?" The room went silent. Charles froze. His arrogance flickered. He laughed it off, but the seed of doubt was planted. Whispers spread, cameras recorded, and in the shadows of that gala hall, there was Leah. Her grandmother had insisted they deliver laundry to the hotel hosting the event, and when Leah's eyes met Charles's across the room, his face went pale. The girl he had tried to erase was standing right in front of him. And this is where the tables turned, because Leah was no longer just a poor child in the shadows. She was the truth he had tried to bury, the living proof of his arrogance, standing before an audience that adored heroes. The irony: the man who owned half the city was now powerless against the little girl he had tried to silence. A poor 12-year-old girl who saved a millionaire, only to be rewarded with cruelty. A powerful man desperate to protect his pride. But now the world has begun to ask questions, and Leah, she has begun to find her voice. The question is, what happens when the invisible child refuses to stay invisible? Because sometimes the smallest hands can turn the mightiest empires upside down.
The gala room froze. Hundreds of eyes turned as the question rang out. Who was the girl who saved your life? Charles Whitmore forced to smile, his jaw tight, his heart pounding in his chest. But across the hall, half hidden in the shadows, a pair of young eyes watched him, eyes he recognized. Leah. The child he had tried to erase from the story was standing in his world, and the empire of lies he had built was about to crack. Charles raised his glass and laughed loudly, trying to drown out the whispers. My driver saved me that night, a loyal man, not a child from the streets. Some laughed nervously. Others frowned. The cameras, though, caught everything. The twitch in his eyes, the way his hand trembled. Leah felt her stomach twist. She wanted to scream the truth, but her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. Stay quiet, Leah. The rich don't fight fair. We can't risk it. So she stayed in the shadows. For now. Days later, Leah's world began to change. Not with praise, but with poison. Strangers whispered when she passed. At school, classmates giggled. Online, comments appeared, liar, street rat, just wants attention. Charles's team of publicists had done their work well. Instead of being hailed as a hero, Leah was painted as a desperate, greedy child making up stories for fame. And Charles? He stood taller than ever, enjoying the applause at his charity events, smiling for cameras as if nothing had happened. One evening, Leah returned home to find her grandmother sitting quietly in the dark. Leah: Grandma, why aren't the lights on? Her grandmother sighed. They cut the power again. Rent is late. Leah's chest ached. She thought of Charles's mansion, glowing with chandeliers, filled with food that went untouched, and here they were, in darkness, punished for telling the truth. She clenched her fists. Leah, he stole my voice. He won't steal it again. The next day, as Leah walked home from school, a woman approached her, well-dressed, holding a press badge. Journalist: You're Leah, aren't you? I believe you. Leah froze. Nobody had said those words before. The woman explained. She had spoken to paramedics from that night. They confirmed it wasn't the driver. It was Leah who had been found drenched, covered in mud, her tiny hands raw from chest compressions. Journalist: You saved him, and the world deserves to know the truth. Leah's eyes filled with tears. For the first time, someone powerful wasn't silencing her, but listening. A week later, headlines hit the newsstands. 12-year-old hero saved millionaire, publicist's lies exposed. The city buzzed. Talk shows debated. Social media exploded with fury. People demanded Charles acknowledge the truth. At a charity event, protesters gathered outside holding signs, "Honor Leah, truth over lies." Inside, Charles's smile cracked. His investors whispered. His name, once untouchable, was now tangled with scandal. And the cruel irony, the same girl he had dismissed as a filthy street rat, was the one now threatening to undo his empire. Late one evening, Charles's car pulled up near Leah's neighborhood. He stepped out, his expensive shoes sinking into the dirt road, and found her sitting outside her apartment, clutching a worn notebook. Charles, low, bitter. "You think you've won, don't you? That the world will believe a child over me?" Leah looked up, her voice calm but firm. "I don't need them to believe me. I know what I did, and you know what I did. That's enough." For the first time in his life, Charles felt something strange. Shame. But shame wasn't the only thing in the shadows that night. As Charles turned to leave, a black car idled across the street. Inside, men watched silently. They weren't reporters. They weren't neighbors. And the next morning, a note appeared, slipped under Leah's door. It read, "Stay silent or you'll regret it." Leah's hands trembled as she read it. She realized this wasn't just about Charles anymore. More powerful men with darker motives were pulling strings behind the scenes. And that's where we leave part 2. A 12-year-old girl fighting for truth against a millionaire's lies. A man whose pride is unraveling before the world's eyes. But now, dangerous forces have entered the game. Leah is no longer just fighting for recognition. She's fighting for survival. The question is, can a poor child outwit men who've spent lifetimes silencing voices like hers? Because the battle for justice has only just begun.
The note was simple, just 6 words. Stay silent or you'll regret it. But those words were enough to shake Leah to her core. She was only 12 years old, a child. Yet someone out there feared her voice so much, they were willing to threaten her life. And here's the irony. The men with all the money and power were terrified of the very person they once dismissed as nothing. But Leah? She was about to prove that even the smallest voice can echo the loudest. Leah barely slept that night. Her grandmother held her close, whispering prayers, begging her to stay quiet. Grandmother pleading, "Please, Leah, they're dangerous. Promise me you won't fight them." But Leah shook her head. "If I stop now, then they win, and they'll keep hurting people like us forever." She was trembling, but her eyes burned with something rare for a child: courage. Meanwhile, Charles Whitmore sat alone in his mansion, the silence heavy around him. The protests outside his gates grew louder each day. Investors called, furious about the scandal. His empire, once unshakable, was collapsing brick by brick. And worst of all, everywhere he turned, he saw her. The girl he called a street rat, the child he had tried to erase. Her face was on the news, her voice quoted in articles, her courage admired by strangers. For the first time in decades, Charles felt powerless, and it terrified him. The journalist who first believed Leah reached out again. Journalist, gentle. "Leah, people want to hear from you directly. Will you speak?" At first, Leah hesitated. But then, remembering the threats, the lies, and her grandmother's dark apartment with no power, she nodded. Days later, Leah stood in front of cameras for the very first time. She wore her school uniform, her hair tied neatly back, her hands shaking as microphones were pushed toward her. Leah, soft but steady. I'm not rich, I'm not powerful, but that night I saved Mr. Whitmore's life. He told me I was nothing, but I am not nothing, and no child should be told that their life doesn't matter. Her voice cracked, but the world heard it. The next morning, headlines exploded. 12-year-old hero breaks silence. Leah Lewis, the voice of truth. But not everyone cheered. Behind the glittering walls of luxury offices, older men in tailored suits gathered around long tables. They weren't just investors. They were men whose wealth and power had grown under Charles's empire. Investor snarling, "If that child keeps talking, we all lose. Shut her down permanently." And with that, Leah's fight shifted. This wasn't just about one arrogant millionaire anymore. It was about an entire system of men who thrived on silencing voices like hers. One evening, as Leah left school, Charles found waiting by his car. The protests, the lies, the shame, it had all worn him down. Charles, hoarse, desperate. "Leah, why are you doing this? Don't you see? You're just making enemies you can't fight." Leah met his gaze, small but unflinching. "You told me I was nothing, but now the whole world sees me, and they see you too. That's why you're afraid." For the first time, Charles had no words. The public began to rally. People who had once ignored Leah's neighborhood now marched with signs demanding justice. Schools collected donations for Leah and her grandmother. Talk shows praised her bravery. Everywhere Charles turned, the tide was against him. And the cruel twist? The empire he had built on pride and arrogance was being dismantled by the child he had tried to erase. But as Leah's voice became more powerful, the darker shadows around her grew. A little girl, once invisible, now standing at the center of a storm. A millionaire brought to his knees by the very child he tried to silence. But as Leah's star rises, darker forces close in, men who have far more to lose than just pride. The question is, can a 12-year-old girl survive the storm she's unleashed? Because the fight for truth is about to turn deadly.
The night of the press conference would be remembered for years. A 12-year-old girl who once collected bottles to survive was about to stand on the same stage as the man who had called her nothing. And the irony? He needed her now more than ever. Charles Whitmore's empire was crumbling. Investors pulled out. Protests grew louder. And the secret network of wealthy men, the ones who threatened Leah, were ready to abandon him if he couldn't silence her. He had two choices: protect his pride and fall alone, or finally face the truth he had been running from. For the first time in his life, Charles made the unthinkable choice. He called Leah. Charles, quiet, almost broken. "Leah, I was wrong. I need your help. And maybe I need to help you too." At first, Leah didn't believe him. Why should she? This was the man who had called her a street rat. But then Charles explained. The men threatening her weren't just investors. They were part of something bigger, a network that thrived on fear, silence, and lies. Charles, grim. "They don't care about me anymore, but they fear you, Leah, your voice, your truth, and that's why we need to fight them together." Leah's grandmother begged her not to, but Leah, with a courage far beyond her years, said yes. The hall was packed. Reporters, cameras, flashing lights. The world was watching. At the podium stood Charles Whitmore, his hair thinner, his face paler, his pride finally broken. Charles, voice shaking. "I lied. It wasn't my driver who saved me. It wasn't luck. It was her. He turned, and the cameras followed his gaze. Leah stepped forward. Dressed simply, her hair tied back, she looked impossibly small on the grand stage, but her voice, it filled the room. "Leah, steady. I'm not here for money. I'm not here for fame. I'm here because the truth matters. Even if you're poor, even if you're a child, even if powerful men try to silence you, your voice matters." The room erupted. Flashes exploded. Applause thundered. And in the audience, those wealthy men who once pulled the strings, they sat stone-faced, their empire of silence exposed. The fallout was immediate. Charles's confession and Leah's testimony sparked investigations. Reporters dug deep. Documents leaked. The men who had threatened Leah were dragged into the light, their lies, their schemes, their cruelty exposed to the world. Charles lost much of his empire, yes, but in losing it, he gained something he hadn't known he needed: humanity. And Leah? She became more than a child hero. She became a symbol, proof that even the smallest voice could shake the highest walls. After the press conference, as the hall emptied, Charles found Leah backstage. He knelt down, lowering himself to her height, his voice trembling. "Charles," softly. "Leah, that night I called you nothing, but today you showed me you're everything I wish I could be. Brave, honest, good, and I'm sorry." For the first time, Leah didn't cry from pain. She cried because justice, in its own way, had been served. A millionaire humbled, a child who refused to stay silent, and a system of lies brought crashing down by the truth. But even as Leah walked away that night, smiling through her tears, she didn't know. Another shadow was watching. Because when you shine a light too bright, it doesn't just reveal the truth, it exposes enemies you never knew you had. And Leah's story? It was only just beginning. This story proves one thing: the people we overlook often become the heroes we need. Have you witnessed a moment like that? Drop your story in the comments and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss the next one.